Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. My name's Hilan Warshaw. I'm a documentary filmmaker based in Manhattan, and I'm here to tell you about my new production, Unwanted, a feature-length documentary about a very dark and troubled time when these lines inscribed on the base of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor turned out to be not true at all. When we as Americans think about our country's role in World War II, we tend to feel very sure that we were on the right side of history.
This is the happiest day of my life.
And of course that's completely true. But it's also the fact that throughout most of the 1930s and 40s, the United States government actively worked to ensure that the number of Jewish refugees from the Nazis admitted into America, meaning people who could have been saved from the Holocaust, stayed extremely limited. To understand the impact of all this, I think it's important to look back at the historical context. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, they pledged to eliminate the Jews from German life. And by and large, what they meant by that was not extermination, it was emigration. There's certainly no denying that the Nazis' hatred was murderous, but it's also true that genocide was not the official policy for the first 9 years of Nazi rule. Getting the Jews out of Europe was. And to this end, they hoped for cooperation from countries who seemed most likely to accept Jewish immigrants, particularly the United States. There was a problem, though.
To restore America to the Americans.
Our unemployment problem was transferred to the United States from foreign lands.
Why shouldn't the cream of the population enjoy the cream of the nation's wealth?
It turned out that most Americans had no intention of accepting the Jews. We have to remember that this was a time when racism, anti-Semitism, and eugenics played a major and open role in American life. In fact, Nazi jurisprudence took some inspiration from America's own racist Jim Crow laws and persecution of African Americans, as well as the quotas directed against Jews and others everywhere from the immigration system to university admissions and other places. Americans were still reeling from the effects of the Depression, and many Americans reacted to the global turmoil and uncertainty by adopting a fierce attitude of isolationism, xenophobia, resistance to immigrants.
Keep America out of Europe and Europe out of America.
Congressmen from both political parties, this was not exclusively a right or left-wing issue, shot down nearly all measures aimed at accepting more refugees. The Assistant Secretary of State, a man named Breckinridge Long, was an admirer of Mussolini and Hitler. And he instructed his consulates to prevent Jews from gaining admittance into the United States. The head of the government, of course, was the president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he was a complicated figure. An idealistic leader who was fiercely anti-Nazi, but who also shared many of the prejudices of his time and his class. And he believed, and he said this a number of times over the years, that letting large number of Jews into a country led to problems, and it wouldn't be a good idea. His record is mixed, but the fact is that Roosevelt rejected many opportunities to admit refugees. And for most of his tenure, the amount of refugees accepted from Germany stayed at less than 25% of the official quota that would have been allowed under existing US law. It's very clear that these attitudes had a powerful impact on the Germans. After all, they had made a promise to their people to get the Jews out of Europe. And now, they were having trouble delivering. And what we see is that their approach quickly changes. they start becoming more brutal, creating ghettos and forcing Jews to wear yellow stars. As Reinhard Heydrich, one of the main architects of the Holocaust, said in 1938, "We cannot get out more than the maximum 8,000 to 10,000 Jews a year. Therefore, I shall have to take steps to isolate the Jew, so he won't enter into the German normal routine of life." They start authorizing savage pogroms, starting with the infamous Kristallnacht pogrom in November of 1938. Hoping that the shocking images of violence would compel the nations of the world to admit Jews in larger numbers.
Berlin, November 10, 1938. In Munich, all Jews were told by angry Nazis that they must leave the country within 48 hours.
It was when it became clear that the international community had no intention of accepting significant numbers of Jews that the Nazis abandoned the offer of emigration. New methods began to be proposed and put into practice. The Holocaust, as we think of it, the systematic slaughter of an entire human population, was taking shape. But even after that, the Allies believed that Hitler might still have been willing to make many Jews available for emigration. In fact, one of the most damning documents that I've read is the minutes of a meeting with President Roosevelt and the British Foreign Secretary, Anthony Eden, in 1943, where the Foreign Secretary said, "We should move very cautiously about offering to take all Jews out of a country like Bulgaria, Poland, and Germany. Hitler might very well take us up on any such offer." It was only when the issue threatened to become a major political embarrassment that Roosevelt finally took action in 1944, establishing the War Refugee Board, which was able to rescue tens of thousands of people in Europe. And this was at the height of wartime. Imagine what could have been done before the United States entered the war, and how many people could have been saved if there had only been the will to do it. So that's the subject of this film, and the way that I'd like to tell the story is in a very immersive format. Unlike in most documentaries, there will be no expert talking head interviews and no voiceover narration telling you what happened next as you're watching. Instead, what you'll see and hear is simply the story unfolding as though you're there. The film's script will be made entirely of primary source materials, such as letters, meeting transcripts, and first-hand accounts, illustrated by archival footage and photographs, and, where necessary, some original cinematography. You're going to be totally within the story as you watch. So we cut suspensefully back and forth from Washington, D.C. to Berlin as the Americans debate the immigration question on the one hand, and on the other side, the Nazis inch ever closer to the policy of extermination. All the while, desperate refugees, the unwanted, try to find a way out of their nightmare. And the clock is ticking. It's going to feel, I think, similar to watching a narrative feature film, but one that's composed entirely of real materials. Now, it's important to note that this film does not try to lay or spread blame for the Holocaust onto the United States. And it's not my belief that the United States could have been expected to single-handedly absorb all or most of Hitler's potential victims, even less so after the Nazis invaded most of Europe. Rather, the subject of this documentary is how and why America avoided doing what it was capable of doing, in admitting those who could have been saved. For people who are Jewish, like myself, this story is obviously resonant. It's part of our history. But this has also never been just a Jewish story, and in 2019, it certainly isn't. The last few years have shown us that questions of refugees, immigration, diversity, and bigotry are still very much with us in our country and in our world, and maybe more urgent than ever. If the subject matter of this film interests you, if you have questions or would like to be involved, I would be happy to hear from you. My contact information will appear at the end of this video. I hope you'll also share this video with friends if you think they'll be interested. And Lastly, if you are in a position to help, the film is currently in development, and donations of all amounts are incredibly helpful and all help us get closer to bringing this story to the screen. I look forward to continuing to keep you updated about Unwanted. Thank you for listening.